Another Tasmania Talks podcast. Go to tasmaniatalks.com.au for anything you've missed.
Lynn Cleaver is one of the most outspoken advocates for the use of medicinal cannabis in Tasmania, and she has very good reason to be. Her son Jeremy has a condition that renders him susceptible to unbelievable seizures. And unfortunately, the seizures are racking. I've seen video, and it's hard to watch. It's really hard to watch. Over the course of his life, Jeremy was prescribed a regime of drugs to try and control the seizures. The sad reality, the nature of the drugs he was taking have leached his system, or did, of calcium. And he was so calcium deficient that when the drugs that were clearly not working to prevent the seizures, when he had a seizure, and it was a violent one, he would collapse, hit the deck, and he's having a seizure. He'd break bones. Now, I've seen the x-rays of Jeremy's upper body, and the young man is mostly metal and pins and screws. Anyhow, after realizing that these prescribed drugs were not working, and in fact, in many instances, were making Jeremy's condition worse than it would otherwise be, Lynn has moved on to medicinal cannabis for Jeremy, which is effective. It's actively reduced the number of seizures he's having and also the severity of them. It also doesn't apparently have the side effects that were experienced during the use of the prescribed medications. So you'd think, wouldn't you? You'd think that as we're going down this big path of medicinal cannabis and allowing people to access it under the so-called and laughingly called controlled access scheme, keyword control, you would have thought Jeremy would be a no-brainer. You would have thought this would be easy. You would have thought because he's already using medicinal marijuana illegally, medicinal cannabis illegally, that there would be a recognition of that in the medical assessments that are taking place to determine whether he can actually get on the scheme or not. There are so many hoops, and these are fiery hoops. These are not just ordinary hoops. These are hoops that are set on fire, and there's a series of them. And people are getting burned as they go through the process, and they're just giving up. The practical upshot for these families is that they are continuing to use the medication that they know works, which for them is medicinal cannabis. Not proper, though, growing it themselves, more often than not. On that basis, given that it's a controlled substance, a prohibited substance to grow in your backyard or anywhere else, every time the siren goes past the Cleaver residence, they get the fear. Is this the bust? Not because they're going to have to confront the legal the legal system, not because they're going to be hauled off by the coppers, not because they're going to end up in court, not because they'll get a conviction to their name and possibly pay a fine, not because of any of those reasons, but because they will have no medicine for Jeremy. Lynn Cleaver is arguably the most patient person I've come across, and I don't know how she's kind of keeping it all together at the moment, because this is being made to be an overly onerous and difficult thing to access. Lynn, good morning. How are you going?
Good morning, Brian. I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Oh, look, I'm fine. I share your frustration, Lynn. I follow. I don't always respond, but I'm obviously following what goes on social media and the dramas you've had here. This is a system designed to fail as many people as possible, isn't it?
Look, standing back now over the last 5 years, I would have to say that the only thing I can see is stalling. You know, the governments in Tasmania and across the country, they really don't want people doing this. And because they've made it so difficult, there's hundreds of thousands of people just like us doing exactly what we're doing and taking the same risk.
It's a risk that you don't need on top of all the other burdens that come with having a seriously, well, let me use the term, disabled child. I mean, Jeremy has a very serious disability that takes up a lot of your time and a lot of your energy. I would have thought the last thing you need, especially when there is a medication that is working for him, demonstrably working for him. Actually, Lynn, let's stop down there for a second. Can you tell us how Jeremy's condition has improved since he came off the majority of the seizure controlling meds, the officially prescribed ones, and onto medicinal cannabis? What's the difference in his condition demonstrably?
Yeah, well, the main reason, we've been researching cannabis, but the main reason that we started him on cannabis therapy was because he was enduring a drug-induced psychosis from a prescribed medicine by his neurologist. So Jeremy was lashing out at his family. He was injuring he put one of his support workers in hospital, broke a knee. He was jumping out of moving vehicles. Now, that was a side effect of a prescribed medicine. When we spoke to his neurologist about this, he suggested that we put Jeremy on a very strong sedative. Now, the sedative wasn't to control seizures, it was to control side effects. So us giving him cannabis has meant that we've reduced up, it would have to be 90% of the prescribed medicines. He's still on a small dose. So we're managing his seizures without him jumping out of moving cars or having the calcium leached from his bones or gum disease or any number of things that he's suffered over the years.
Lynn, the side effects that are, and I use the term in inverted commas, the side effects that are often attributed to medicinal cannabis are a bit airy-fairy, aren't they? Especially when you consider or line them up against the well-documented side effects, and they're often written on the warning label of the drug itself, of many of these prescribed medications. It's almost like there's this sort of denial here. We're happy to give you stuff that we know for sure has a bunch of really, really bad side effects, and here's a very long list of them on the packet. And on the other hand, we have a product, or a substance at least, that is relatively easy to procure, doesn't seem to have the same side effects, demonstrably doesn't seem to have the same side effects, but because we've not really studied the capacities of cannabinoids, because of their illegality for a long time. We haven't got the body of evidence that says, look, the side effects for medicinal cannabis are not as bad as the side effects for these prescribed medications. And that's sort of the wriggle room the medical profession's wandering around in at the moment, isn't it? That's the wriggle room to get out of all this.
Well, that's one of the biggest issues in Australia is we have legislators that seem to think that we need to recreate the wheel. A lot of studies have been done and are being done. That proves the safety and the efficacy of cannabis medicine, so that Australian patients should have to wait while Australian legislators do another whole body of research is rather unfair and, dare I say, cruel. And not only that, it's sort of bizarre too, Lynn, when there's so much officially sanctioned government support for the growing of medicinal cannabis as a product, as a crop. We're celebrating it all over the place. The federal government's jumping up and down saying, yeah, this will be a great industry for Australia, and the Tasmanian government's done the same thing. Yeah, this will be a fabulous thing for Tasmania, great for the economy and all that. What's our plan? To produce this stuff and then export the drugs we make from it, or export the raw product overseas so that they can make the drugs from it. I mean, what is the plan? What's the actual plan? Well, if they're jumping up and down, so what, we deny Australians access to something that we're growing and exporting? Sounds like uranium. Up to this point, the patient has been the last consideration. We're not being listened to, we're not being heard, and at the end of it, Australian patients are suffering while they fluff around doing whatever they think is best. But, for somebody like Jeremy and patients like him, it's not working.
Many other countries have far more sensible positions on this issue than Australia does. The evidence has been, though, Lynn, and you and I both know that they fear the slippery slope. They fear the slippery slope of recognising and making medicinal cannabis relatively easy to access. and the complete deregulation, legalisation, call it what you want, that we've seen in a bunch of states in the United States, for example, of the substance actually. So you're effectively talking decriminalising marijuana. There's not a poly you'll stand up in the country and win votes on that one, I can assure you.
No, but that's the height of ignorance, isn't it, really? When you've got several 100,000 people in Australia accessing cannabis medicines illegally.
Is that the number? So that's an
estimate.
Okay.
The estimate is 100,000 patients using cannabis illegally. I think the numbers are in the few thousand that have a script.
Yeah.
There's 12 patients in Tasmania, but those numbers don't specify whether it's 12 patients or 12 prescriptions.
So it could be 12 prescriptions for one patient.
It could be repeat.
Or 6 for 2. Or okay, all right.
Yeah. So 12 people in Tasmania legally accessing. Patients are getting raided. A friend of mine was raided not so long ago, had every drop of his medicine taken from his house. Now, patients shouldn't have to live in fear like that.
There was an interesting development. I don't know how closely you were following this, Lynn, but an interesting development in, I guess you'd probably call it Pot Central in New South Wales at Nimbin. The hemp embassy there, if I'm not mistaken, was raided last week. And they took all the, what you might call combustible hemp products, in other words, anything you might smoke or related to it, but left the medicinal cannabis there. So the police have raided this place. There's like 40-odd coppers. Have raided the thing, taken out everything but the medicinal cannabis. So there's a sense, at least at community level, I don't know whether it was a government instruction or came from police hierarchy, or it was the local command going, look, we've got too many locals using this, we can't really get in there and take their medicine effectively. And they didn't do it. It was interesting though, wasn't it? Interesting.
Very interesting, and it's good news that they left the medicine, but if they're doing that, why can't they legislate for that?
Well, yeah. Well, I don't think anybody wants to ultimately own it, and and there's a sense out there that it is a slippery slope to full deregulation, legalisation, again, call it whatever you want, but nobody really wants that, despite the fact that there was a study around a couple of days ago suggesting that if they did legalise it and tax it, there'd be billions of dollars worth of revenue flowing into the coffers. I've long argued that, not from any ideological position or anything, that the drug laws will change when the Treasury boffins work out how much they can tax it. It'll have nothing to do with health. It'll have nothing to do with any of that. It'll be economic for sure.
We're not having any impact at all. I mean, we've been talking to the Tasmanian government for 5 years.
I know you have.
And if there was any ounce of compassion towards people like Jeremy and other Tasmanians using cannabis, it would have already changed for the better. So
okay, where is your application process at the moment, Lynn? Is there anything in train, or is it all? Have you given up?
No, we were advised by a senior clinician at the General to actually seek a referral for one with a full-time neurologist here, because he was of the impression that Jeremy would have a better chance at getting a legal script if he were seeing somebody who was local rather than fly in, fly out.
Right.
We did that, but the neurologist in question doesn't see patients with epilepsy, so we just have to wait now for a neurologist that specialises in epilepsy who is local, and then we'll try again.
Lordy. And every time you're referred on to a different person, a different specialist or a different neurologist, you have to go through the process right from the beginning.
Yeah, and not only that, like Jeremy also needs continuing care.
Yeah.
He needs to see a specialist that is invested in his general health and well-being, as well as this, the cannabis stuff takes up so much time.
I don't know how you've done any of it, Lynn, to be honest. I mean, Jeremy's a full-time job for probably a couple of people, and you've managed to do that, and also all the lobbying you've done. I know you get a sympathetic ear from many of the pollies, but beyond that, there's not a lot of action, is there?
Well, I mean, we've had any number of politicians, state and federal, here at our medicine garden, standing next to our plants and in front of Jeremy. And the political parties seem not too interested, and there's no urgency for them to legislate to protect Tasmanians or Australians, generally speaking, who are using cannabis.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I don't know how it can be ignored.
Well, what they're worried about is, every pot grower out there going, I'm making medicine, mate. It's all right. Yeah, nothing to see here, and packaging it up and selling it to mates and what have you.
Well, that's what happens now. So
Yeah, I know. Okay, Lynn, I don't know what to say to you. It's just it's the most frustrating thing when you have a very specific issue that is being ignored politically, when that issue is something that you deal with every second of every day, 365 days a year. The stress and strain involved in all that is extraordinary. We can do, I would have thought at the stroke of a pen and the passing of a couple of bits of legislation, we could remove a bunch of that stress and get those who genuinely benefit from this medicine. And if you don't benefit from it, if there is no benefit, there's no point in doing it. None whatsoever.
No.
But if there is a demonstrable benefit to patients, then it should be easy access rather than controlled access to the point of no access. Lynn, thank you. We'll keep making the argument. She get a bit shouty before an election. Not much we can really do until there's a massive change of political will. And I just don't sense that that's going to happen from either party at the moment, to be honest.
No.
Okay. Lynn, best to you and the family, and best to Jeremy. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad.
See ya. Lynn Cleaver. See, the bizarre thing about all this is, okay, the really, really bizarre thing is they're taking people like Jeremy who are using already illicit cannabis, noting that there are no obvious and disturbing side effects, but then they're saying you've got to go out and try all these other prescription drugs first and see whether they don't work. Yet the side effects from many of those drugs that have already been tried, and there's dozens of them, produce the kind of situation that Lynn was describing there, where Jeremy's trying to jump out of moving cars and he's thumping people. The cannabis doesn't do that. And yet the doctors are wanting him to go back on the medications that cause that kind of side effect. It denies the reality. It denies the reality of what these patients are doing right now. And if politics wants to continue to live in denial of that, well, then that's fine. But then they have to put up with the complaints and the righteous complaints of people like Lynn and go, and you just don't care. Because from her position, it's pretty obvious that, well, you kind of don't.
Another Tasmania Talks podcast. Go to tasmaniatalks.com.au for anything you've missed.